Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Flyer Up Podcast. I'm your host, Amadeo Gracia, along with my partner, Chris Mayer, and we have a returning guest for you on the Flyer Up Podcast. We have Flyers Daily Host Jason Myrtetus. Jason, how are you doing today? Welcome back.
What's going on, boys? It's the Offseason. I'm shake. I got the withdrawal shakes already. Like I'm ready for hockey to come back already. I just don't know when the hell that's going to be. I don't know what we're counting down towards again.
Yeah, it literally just ended yesterday with the Tampa Bay Lightning win the Stanley Cup, and it's just like for you two, didn't it feel odd just because it's September, it's almost October, and the Stanley Cup was just awarded? Like was that just like an odd feeling in your mind, both of you?
Well, it was odd, watching the presentation last night. The league did such a good job with this whole thing. I just give them so much credit because they're a league that usually can't get out of their own way when it comes to making big decisions, thinking big, and being amenable to different variances and all that stuff. And the best part about the NHL coming back wasn't that Gary handed out the cup last night, and that was awesome. It really was. I mean, it was almost like, oh my God, they actually did it. They had 40,000 tests and no positives. But the greatest part about what happened last night was something that a lot of people didn't even talk about. That along with the return to play protocol came labor peace till 2026. And to me, that was the most important element that came out of when the game paused until now, is the fact that there is labor peace. There's a new team coming in. There's a new TV contract that's coming. And there's labor peace in a very difficult situation. So I think that's awesome. The best team won. It wasn't easy. I think there's no asterisks for me by this cup. Yeah, it's the COVID Cup or the coronavirus Cup, but I mean, what you had to go through as a player, and I talked to a lot of players, as you guys know, and living in a bubble is not easy. We go to a hotel for a weekend and we go on vacation, and it's cool for a few days, but like by day 4 or 5 of a vacation, I got to get out of this freaking hotel. I can't sleep here anymore. There's no circulating air. You want your pets, you want your own bed, whatever. You want to be able to run down to the fridge. You live in a hotel, you don't have any of that. And I'll tell you, it wears on players. I mean, they weren't complaining about it because that's the way hockey players are. But the fact that the cup got handed out last night was pretty spectacular. But it was weird seeing it get handed out into an empty building for sure.
Yeah, just like some of the after comments, after the Lightning won the cup, specifically from a guy like Patrick Maroon, when he was describing what life was like in there. Sometimes you just have those dark days. And to me, I just can't imagine what that is like for a player to be in that bubble for 2 months. Yeah. It's probably the most difficult thing in the world.
Yeah, definitely. And honestly, I think one thing is too is like people don't realize how hard it was. Well, I mean, yes, they are playing in such a weird circumstance and they're in a hotel for 60 plus days, but they had to play an extra round. So some teams had to play an extra round to get into this thing.
And Tampa played 900 periods because of overtime.
Yeah. And then you got to play, with the whole round robin and everything like that to figure out where you're seating again when you kind of already had an idea of where you were going to be when the season ended. So that must have been a little weird as well. But yeah, Jason, I mean, you hit it right on the spot. I mean, yeah, the best team won. I mean, honestly, I think out of the Final Four with Tampa versus the Islanders and Dallas and Vegas, I think honestly 3 of the teams were pretty known. I mean, really, it was just the Islanders that nobody expected. I mean, obviously, all of them were top 8 in the league when the whole return to play started, and then you have the Islanders who sadly beat the Flyers. But again, I mean, yeah, honestly, the best team won. I mean, they were just me and Amadeo, we talked about this before. Honestly, to me, it was whatever team just got that click of momentum at the right time, and Tampa had got it, and they never looked back. I honestly looked at Tampa this year, how the 16 Penguins were. They got that momentum late in the year, and then they just ran it through and they won the cup. And that's how I kind of look at Tampa Bay this year.
Well, I think what helped Tampa was in this unique playoffs too was the fact that they got swept last year by Columbus.
I think so too.
So that allowed them to manufacture hate, urgency, redemption, all of these things that in an empty building in a neutral site were probably hard to manufacture for some teams and certainly some players that feed off crowd. So, having that element of the team that knocked us out last year embarrassingly in a sweep in the first round allowed them to ratchet their game to a high level. And then their best players led the way. I mean, Hedman was an absolute just absolute fucking stud. Braden Point, ridiculous how good he is. Kucherov. I mean, when you have the best defenseman on the planet, you have two probably top three forwards on the planet, and you have probably the best goaltender on the planet. That's a pretty good recipe to win. You check some pretty key boxes. Not to mention, you got great depth. You've got great veterans. You've got players that are specialists, and you bring in guys, you just mentioned him, Pat Maroon, who won his first cup last year as a St. Louis native in his hometown, and then goes back to back. And you bring in Barclay Goodrow, and you bring in Blake Coleman, a little bit of sandpaper and a little toughness, and look what you get. You got a team that this is the opportunity for them to win it. Julien Brisebois deserves a lot of credit for putting the final pieces in place with that roster to get it over the top. And Steve Yzerman deserves a ton of credit because his fingerprints are all over it for building the core of that roster with really good drafting and finding guys like Braden Point. They didn't think was a good enough athlete. You look at him; he was passed over by a lot of teams. You look at, the trade for Sergachev with Drouin. That move looks fantastic. You got Hedman. You're drafting great players with Kucherov, and Tampa's got a little bit of an advantage. It's a non-income tax state. I think that's a big advantage. I don't think enough people look at that. I think that is an advantage because it allows you to sign a player at a lower AAV and they still bring home more money. So I think that is an advantage. They're up against it now, but watching the whole playoffs was awesome. It was great. The product on the ice I thought was great, and I'm so happy that the game came back. And to me, the best thing about it coming back was that out of all the sports that came back, I thought that they handled it the best. They may not have the best ratings because hockey doesn't appeal like the other ones do, but I thought they handled the social issues well. I thought that the quality of the product was great. The way they presented it on television was great. And all said and done, 0 positive tests. There were so many doubters out there and doomsdayers. Once they start, they're not going to finish. How are they going to keep this? The virus doesn't know they're in a bubble, all this bullshit, right? Well, the protocols that the NHL put in place worked, and it was awesome.
Yeah, just like going back to what you were talking about with Tampa Bay, what happened to them last year. Like, there's always that saying that goes around, you have to learn how to lose before you learn how to win. Mm-hmm. And sadly, they lost in one of the worst ways possible. And like you said, Jason, that was probably the best motivation they could have going into this playoff run and the way they just build that team.
Well, that team last year in the regular season, not this past season, the one before, was a fucking wagon, right? They were just, 128 points in the regular season. They were waiting for the playoffs to start, and then Tortorella just frustrated them with the Columbus, and they end up sweeping them, and it was just crazy. But, to use that, I talked to Alain Vigneault a couple of days after the season on Flyers Daily, and I asked him about that. I said, the way you guys went out, you got a couple of rounds of experience, but the way you guys went out has to leave a bad taste in everybody's mouth. But it's what you do with the bad taste that ultimately is what matters. Like, you can say it, oh, it hurts and we're going to learn from this, but it's what you do in the gym in the off season and your training and your competitive desire going forward. Otherwise, it didn't mean anything. And Tampa made that sweep against Columbus mean everything. And I'm sure when those guys lifted up the cup last night, those guys that were on that team remembered it. No doubt about it. They slayed the Dragon in the first round, 5 overtime game in game number 1, and end up at getting by Columbus and then going all the way and winning the cup. So awesome stuff, man. Great stories.
Yeah, it's like players that last year. Braden Point, he had an abysmal playoff last year. Look at what he did this year in the playoffs. Fantastic. Yeah. Nikita Kucherov got suspended for that one game against the Columbus series last year. Look at what he did. Yeah. Victor Hedman, Andrei Vasilevsky, the entire team just stepped up, and they wanted to. Remember the NHL awards last year when they were making fun of Tampa Bay so much, and then you saw Andrei Vasilevsky's face. He was the only guy that was not laughing. Yeah, he took that with a purpose coming into this playoffs.
Yeah, and they obviously put in the work, and they compartmentalized it during the regular season, and when they got to the playoffs, they opened up the can of stink. It's like farting in a jar and putting a lid on it, and then opening it up at the right time to gross you out. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And they used it. So I don't know. I might have done that in college or something to somebody, but I don't know.
Now, seeing Steven Stamkos, Chris, because you told me this yesterday, that you started to cry a little bit when Steven Stamkos finally looked at that cup. Like, do you think, does it compare to a guy like an Alex Ovechkin finally lifting that cup to where you see this guy that was so hasn't got it for so long, then he finally gets it?
No, it's not that level for me. For Stammer, I mean, Stammer is a great player, but I mean, he's been a player that's been really besieged by injuries and key injuries, from the broken leg to the blood clots. This year, he only played 2 minutes and 47 seconds since February. So I don't look at it that way. Ovechkin plays every game, every year, leads the league in scoring, and is a generational player. It's different. Stammer's a great player, but to me, it's not on the same level. It was good to see him lift the cup. But I mean, I'm sure if you put in some sodium pentothal and some truth serum into him, only playing 2 minutes and 47 seconds as a return to play doesn't feel the same as a guy who played all those games and all those minutes. You feel a part of it for sure, and he's a big part of the team and he's a leader, but playing it and earning it. I guess he earned it in some way, shape, or form, but I know that if I was a player and I only played that amount of time in the return, I wouldn't feel satiated from that cup like I would if like Victor Hedman did.
Yeah, Chris, I just want, because you were texting me this yesterday, like, it feels like after every Stanley Cup final, like, since you got into hockey at a very late stage, it feels like every Stanley Cup final, it's like, it gets that emotion to you. So, Chris, I just want to feel like that emotion you were going through yesterday.
Yeah,
That's just the cup,
I
man.
was just
That's
like,
the cup overwhelming you.
yeah, like I was like, I just get so happy when I see, like, once I saw Goudreau like turn around and just throw his stuff in the air and just start skating down. I was like, dude, that feeling must be the greatest feeling in the world. Like, and I can't, like, I literally was just staring at the TV. I could not take my eyes off of it. I didn't cry when Stamkos lifted it. I started to cry when they gave it to Coburn. Because Coburn was one of my favorite players when I was a kid. I loved Coburn.
Why again?
He gets so overlooked to me, and I liked him, and I just did. I don't know why. I feel like every time, honestly, I think since Ovechkin won, I've cried every time. Obviously 16 and 17, I didn't cry because I kind of turned off the TV in anger. But in the other years after that, I mean, I don't know. It just hit me. Like, it's just like, because I think one thing is once they started to pass the cup around, I started to think of Scott Mayfield scoring against Carter Hart in Game 7, and I started to get pissed. So that's why I was a little bitter as well. But again, I mean, to me, I just thought it was cool how they did the whole presentation too, like how they had it different where the whole team was around them when they gave the cup to Stamkos. I thought that was cool. And then they had like I guess they're fireworks. I don't know, where they shot them up. Like that was cool as well. Like I really enjoyed all of it. And I think, and as you said earlier, Jace, with the way they did it on TV, like that was huge. I think that was one of the biggest things because, as dumb as this might sound, I thought those seat covers were like the whole game changer because it took away that it was really an empty rink.
Yeah, they did a good job, like set dressing it, if you will, right? And it looked good. It sounded good with the big screens. Players said in there it was very quiet, because they weren't getting pumped in sound like we were. But they did a great job with it. And look, the cup, I always say this, and I talked to so many guys that have won it and so many guys who haven't won it. And it's not a trophy you win. It's a trophy you earn. And it takes, I talked to Craig Berube about this after last year. It takes a really good team and a ton of luck. I mean, it really does. It's like a goal off a butt changes a series or something like that, A bad penalty call changes a series. And that's what it takes to win it. Now there's going to be 32 teams, not this year, but next. Theoretically, every team should win the cup at 1 out of every 32 years. But it doesn't work that way. And it takes a lot of luck. And, you got to put yourself in position to capture the luck. And some teams have done better than others. But it's an amazing feat to win. And like you said, I cannot imagine what it's like to win it. Because I remember back in 2010, and I was with the Flyers then doing the games as well. And when Chicago won it on that goal from Kane in overtime, when I got done the broadcast and the post-game show, I just went and sat out on the Flyers bench while they were on the ice with their families and friends and everybody. And I think the game probably ended at like 10:30 at night, and I was there until about 12:30 just watching them skate around with the cup and party. And it was crazy, just like kind of experiencing, that was their first cup for most of those guys. and what it must have been like to win that and kind of climb that mountain and get to the top. It's got to just be off the charts.
Yeah, I don't want to be reminded about that cup. I was I think, not like a little bit over like 10, 12 years old when I first had season tickets. And it was just like I bawled out crying in my seats right there because I was just like, the goal went in. And then that's when I just started crying.
Yeah. At that time, I was 7, and I had really had no idea what hockey was. So, I ended up getting into it in the last lockout, in 12-13. I told this story many times. I'm sure people probably know it like it's the back of their hand by now. But, yeah, I mean, when I started, it was kind of just, a little bit at a time. I started getting into it, and I really started getting deeply into it around 14-15, and they were absolutely abysmal that year. I think they had 10 road wins. So honestly, a pretty bad time. But then this year in particular was the best season I've ever seen. The regular season wise and points wise, first time I've seen them play in the second round. So it definitely was a boost to see that. And regardless of the game 7 loss, I was still very proud of the team because again, it was such an unbelievable year coming off of using 8 goalies last year and being one of the worst teams in the league and things like that. But again, it really was a good turnaround for the team that's coming into 1920.
Oh yeah, it was a huge progressive step move forward, and that's exactly what they needed. They needed to have a big step forward, and look, they had 7 more points year to year, and they played 13 less games. They were on a 100-point pace. So yeah, they've moved forward in a big way, but the work's not done. They still got a lot of work to do if they want to be where Tampa is now.
Right. Exactly.
And Jace, I want to ask you this question. So, with the way the fan base just like came around to the Flyers like during the most of the playoff run, now with every other Philadelphia sports team literally just pissing off the fan bases, with the Phillies what they did, the Eagles struggling, and the Sixers going through their whole craziness right now, do you think the Flyers are probably the next best savior for the city to win a championship?
Well, they're the team that's positioned the best right now for sure. I mean, you look at the other teams, the Phillies, and whether they end up firing Clentac and McPhail remains to be seen. But I mean, look, I loved the Phillies as a kid, but I'm not in love with the Phillies now because why would I love something that doesn't love me back, right? And
Exactly.
They've been, I mean, this is going to sound harsh, but it's true. They've been a loser organization for my entire life, except for a couple of years. And they've won 2 World Series in that time, in 80 and then again in 08. But they've had these small windows where they've been decent or good, and they in 08 they capitalized on it. They should have won more than one with that core, but they didn't. The Sixers have been a loser organization as well, and they're run by guys that took a path of losing to try and win. And you look at a team like the Miami Heat, who's in the NBA Finals, and I mean they don't have a higher than a top 12 overall draft pick on that team. And now we see reports that Simmons and Embiid don't like each other. Well, I don't give a shit if you like each other or not. It was flawed from the get-go, and the process was a donkey gong show. And then you look at the Eagles and Howie Roseman, and they won in 20. It pisses me off because all these assholes, fuckers, during the process were like, the Flyers need to do what the Sixers are doing. First of all, the sports are totally different.
Exactly.
You have a roster of 12 players, 7 of them are of consequence. And one player in basketball obviously means a ton more than it means in hockey. The best player on the planet hasn't won shit in hockey in McDavid. But then you look at the Eagles and Howie and Doug, and they won a Super Bowl, and it was awesome. Howie, it was the blind squirrel finding a nut, because Howie is another donkey gong show when it comes to drafting, developing talent. I mean, this guy's a disaster, right? So I don't know what the future is for those teams. But what I know is this. When it comes to the Flyers, they got a really good coach. A guy that is pedigreed, been there, done that. He hasn't won a cup. Been there.
He knows his players, too.
Yeah, he does. And he's changed throughout his career. He has evolved as a coach. They have a general manager who, look, if you're looking for the traits of a general manager right now in the NHL, I think I would take a Harvard-educated guy. Considering
I've been saying that.
Else,
I've been saying that too. I've been saying this is huge because, and I'm looking at this situation they got with all the cap and the draft and free agency and what they do and whatnot. Like, it is a damn good thing that he went to Harvard.
Yeah,
like it's
huge.
Complicated.
Yep.
It is. It's not, like simple, math. It's not long division. It's nothing that's easy. It's going to be tough. And some people think it's going to be a lot easier, which is just mind-boggling to me.
I don't see how it's easier in any way, shape, or form. But probably the best news for Chuck Fletcher is that he has a cupboard full of highly thought of prospects and still has all of his picks. So if he does see a situation to make a trade, their currency, and the reason why that currency is worth even more right now. I talked to Brent Flair about this. It was on Flyers Daily from Monday's episode in part 1. The reason why that currency is even more valuable now is because of the flat cap. And because we know that draft picks and young players on ELCs don't cost a lot of money, so they don't take up cap space. So teams looking to gain assets, and more teams are going to rebuild now, like Arizona is going to go through a pronounced rebuild. They're going to shed salary, and they're going to shed players, and they'll retain salary in situations where they can get prospects and picks. So if the Flyers choose to go in that direction, they have the currency there to do it as well. So they're in a really good position, and they have good young players here, more coming. So if they make a trade, it's not like they, bleed the cupboard dry. So they're in a really good position. Maybe not the best cap situation in the NHL, but they're a team that has a lot of, pliability with what they can do pending what becomes available, because teams will try and shed some high priced and by virtue some really highly talented players.
And yeah, that transitions great into our next topic, talking about what Chuck Fletcher was talking about in the press conference day. And one quote that did stand out to me was when he was when Brett Flair was actually talking about some of the young guys that can actually come up and compete for a spot next season. Guys like Lindziski, Wade Allison, Linus Sandin are the players that came to mind. And what do you think about that, Jace? Like, do you think those guys can actually compete for a spot maybe in that bottom 6?
They could. It depends on what they do, obviously, with a guy like Pitlick. I don't see any situation where they're going to re-sign Nate Thompson or Derek Grant. So, but Lashinsky and Wade Allison are both big bodies. They're not young guys at this point. They played their collegiate career, so they have NHL bodies now. So those guys both could fall into that role. Linus Sandin is an interesting one, and I think that he has a chance as well. But I think Brent said this on the availability today but they're going to have to come in and earn it. Nothing's going to be given to them. They haven't played pro yet in the NHL, so it could be a situation where it's weird because they don't get like a rookie camp in the middle of the summer to kind of see where they are. But they'll get an opportunity, and if not, they'll go to the AHL, presuming there's an AHL season. That's a whole other story. But I think it'll be interesting to see if I think one of those guys will be on the roster come opening day. If I was betting, I would probably say it's Linus Sandin, which is weird because he's been playing in Europe and he hasn't played North American. And even with Lashinsky and Wade Allison playing, collegiate and some pretty big programs, I think that Linus is a guy that I think that they feel like can jump in.
Yeah, just for looking at the other prospects in the pool, let's say a guy like a Morgan Frost and Isaac Ratcliffe, what does that happen? If there's a question mark for the AHL season, what happens with those guys that maybe don't make the roster and you just have that question mark if the AHL season is even possible at this point? What happens right there?
Yeah, that's a good question that I don't know the answer to. I don't know that Chuck Fletcher knows the answer to. Nobody does at this point. The AHL is driven all by gate. And if you can't have fans, that's a really tough for that. The league's going to have to support it in some way, shape, or form. They're going to have to figure that out because they can't just have players not playing. They have to figure out where they can play. And, guys could jettison to Europe where they are playing right now. And even with some limited crowds.
I was just going to say that's probably one of the biggest reasons why you have so many guys going over there.
Yeah, there's certainty there. I mean, there's a lot of draft eligible guys that are already playing in the season over there right now. Mm-hmm. I talked to Joachim Granlund, who's the Flyers amateur scout that handles Europe, and he's getting to watch players right now that are in this entry draft, which is obviously unprecedented. So, I don't know how that's going to play out for guys, and how they're going to get these guys back on the ice. I think that's why the league's probably going to start after January as opposed to in December. Because it gives them a better chance to to kind of get maybe some fans in some buildings and some markets, and maybe the AHL will do some kind of rotating hub cities or something like that where they can have fans north of the border.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because I was just going to ask, you think there's any way that the AHL could maybe be in the exact same bubble the NHL is and have AHL games in that bubble?
No, I think it'd be too many people in one bubble.
That's
I
true.
think they would have to separate them because I mean the bubble would have to be really controlled, and the more people, more teams, more staffs you put in there, it would make it difficult. So, the other thing is the NHL foot the bill for the NHL bubbles. Can the AHL fit the bill? No, they can't foot that bill. So
yeah.
How they're going to figure this out is going to be really interesting, and hopefully, they can get it back on the ice as quickly as possible. If not, though, I think the NHL rosters will be expanded, and some of those guys will be practicing with the team. And you're going to have, when the NHL does come back, they're going to be more condensed schedule, so you're going to be going to that expanded roster a little bit more.
Yeah, then you're just looking at the all-season outlook for the Flyers too. All the UFAs that they have right now, they just signed Robert Haig, Nicolas Aube-Kubel. They still have Phil Myers assigned to an RFA deal. Nolan Patrick's still discussing right there. It's just like, what do you think for yourself, what do you think should be the Flyers' main goal right now? Like, what do you think they should look to improve upon right now?
I know Chuck mentioned in his initial availability after the season was defensive depth. I think that's still a very important area because I think there's going to be a move there. They did sign Mark Friedman, but I don't think they envision him as a top 6 guy right now. So I think they'd like to get a veteran in to help with their D depth. Because I don't think they're going to bring Braun back, and I don't think that Ghost is going to remain. I think there's a real good chance that he gets moved, and they'll free up some cap space in that move as well. What they end up getting in return remains to be seen, whether it's a cap move or it's a hockey trade. So I think they're going to look at some sort of veteran defenseman to bring in and kind of solidify that. I think that. I think they want to get a little bit more sandpaper up front, a little more size. I think they felt like they got pushed around a little bit by the Islanders, and they did. So I think they're going to look for a little bit more size there. Not necessarily like a Pat Maroon type player, but something similar to that. A veteran guy that can help in the bottom 6. And I mean, look, if you can go out and find a scorer, I think that everything's on the table. I think it's a unique situation where you may be able to pry a player from a team when you couldn't before. So,
think there's any way they try to get a guy like Josh Anderson from Columbus?
Yeah, I think he'd be a possibility. I mean, look, you've heard the big names that are out there, Gaudreau, and you hear Line, and I think that those are unlikely. I don't look at a player like Line as being tradable if I'm Winnipeg. I mean, he's not a 30-goal scorer. I mean, he may not even be a 40-goal scorer. He's getting 50-goal scorer. They don't grow on trees. Yeah. And his 3-zone game is so much improved this past year that finally you got the guy doing the right things in the other 2 zones, and now you're going to move him. So, but if there's a deal to be made there, I mean, it'd be general manager malpractice to not, kick the tires and see what's going on, and can call Kevin Cheveldae off in Winnipeg and say, what are you looking for? You need D, I know that, but what else are you looking for?
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I wanted to touch on too, you talked about Ghost getting moved. If he does get moved, and it's been pretty much been looked at by just about every Flyers fan that they think that they should either move him or James Van Riemsdyk. If Ghost is to get moved, do you think it would be any time around now, or do you think it would just be at the draft?
I think it's any time between this very minute and the draft. I mean, it could be after the draft too. Teams may feel like they didn't get it. They were trying to get a deal done at the draft, and they didn't get a guy they were targeting, and then he's their second option. So, but usually those kind of deals will happen right around the draft. I mean, we're looking at a week from now, so those conversations are all happening right now, and teams are trying to pit offers against each other. And I know that Chuck Fletcher's phone is ringing. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that Ghost is a guy, he's had a 65-point season just a couple of years ago. And what I know is that, general managers and head coaches, they carry a lot of arrogance, and they say, well, he's not succeeding there, but he did do that at one time. So we put him in our system, and we can make that happen.
And that was also one thing that Fletcher had talked about today, is that, not many defensemen get 65-point seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, not a lot of guys in baseball had 50 home run years, but Brady Anderson did, and then he never did it again. So is that who he is? I don't think so. I think it was a great year that he had, but if Shane's not scoring and he's not driving offense, at a pretty alarming clip. And when you look, say 65 points, that's an alarming clip for a defender. Then he can be a net negative because he's not a great defender. He's had periods where his defensive games looks very
Better.
improved.
Mm-hmm.
But people kept saying, why did they not put him in that Islanders series? And I think that would have been a disaster, putting him in that situation. I thought I just wasn't the right opponent for him.
No.
They'd have feasted on him on the forecheck, going back.
Pushed around.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, it just...
And that was one of the reasons why I had honestly thought why they didn't put Frost in. Because, like, when I look at Farabee, right, and I look at them as they're to me, they're kind of similar players, just with not like the way not the style of play, but weight-wise and things like that. I looked at, with the way that Hayes, Konechny, Farabee line was, it seemed like a lot of the time they dumped the puck in because they got bodied around a lot, especially Farabee. I mean, the Islanders, like, obviously we all know, they got pretty big defensemen, guys like Polak, Mayfield, Andy Green, Nicoletti, like, they're all big guys. And I realized a lot of the time that Farabee got pushed around a lot. I think that might have been one of the reasons why that they didn't insert Frost at some point, because I know a lot of people were kind of calling for that, saying, maybe they put Frost in. I don't think it would have done anything anyway, but that's just something to kind of go off of there. But, Jace, one thing I wanted to ask, too, is...
Here, let me comment on that real quick.
Okay.
I didn't think Frost was an option for a couple of reasons. Number one, none of us know how he looked in practice because none of us could see practice.
Right.
Number one. Number two, he hadn't played a hockey game since early March.
For like 5+ months.
Yeah, I mean, to put him in that spot in that series would have been really
rough.
Yeah, it'd have been tough. So I understand not putting him in that situation. And to me, you're right. Farabee got manhandled in that series a few times, and he did a little bit against Montreal as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, look, those guys when they're that young, they don't have their man strength yet, and you're playing in that league with Shea Weber, right, and Matt Martin, guys like that. Yeah, I mean, Anders Lee and Brock Nelson. I mean, you're talking about some horses.
Yeah.
And, that's why they say, hey, this guy came into camp. He's an elite offensive player, but he's got to put on muscle. That's why.
And that's one of the things they talked about with those two just coming in the training camp to start the season was, did any of them get bigger? That was one of the biggest questions.
Yep.
And then to go back to my point there, talking about Ghost, right? How we just talked about that a little bit. Do you think that the reason maybe nothing's happened with Ghost yet is because of all this talk with Torrey Krug?
What's the talk with Torrey Krug?
That he's supposed to be getting shopped around, and that there's been a couple
somebody's going to trade for his rights.
Yeah, right. Now, you think there's any way that that Ghost hasn't been moved yet because of Krug? Maybe because they think that they're similar players or things like that.
I mean, it could be a factor because, back to kind of the point I made before where teams waiting, the teams that are in on Krug, somebody that ends up not able to get Krug, he could be the backup option. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, that could be a part of it. And I've seen some of the teams, Columbus reporting, trying to get, some of the teams trying to get his rights to be able to get a run at him before free agency starts.
Yeah, I believe Arizona's been looking at him too.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me.
No, it doesn't.
that team's going through a total rebuild. They're going to shop OEL, and then they're going to trade for the rights to Torrey Krug. They have no draft picks.
Yeah,
and they just
I saw Edmonton as well.
Now that makes sense.
It does.
Krug, Detroit makes sense. These places make sense.
Florida was one.
Yeah, like I see that Arizona rumor, and I go, somebody got bad info because that makes no sense.
It doesn't. It really does. If they're shopping at Larson, why would they try to get Krug?
Yeah, and they have no draft picks.
Right.
I mean, they just got punched because they were idiots and brought guys in and worked them out when they knew they couldn't. And then the GM just kind of left them in the lurch with John Chaika.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden they're going to go through a pronounced multi-year, I'm not talking 24-month, but 48-month rebuild again. And they're going to trade for Krug. That doesn't make any sense.
And then I've been seeing something about them trying to move Kemper, and there's teams that are looking at him. You just had your best season in 8 years. Yeah,
but they're going to rebuild. So that does make sense. He's only under contract for 2 more, and they got a decent guy in his backup at Antti Ranta. If you're going to rebuild, Kemper's value is never going to be higher because you get him for more than a year. Mm-hmm. And if they're going in a rebuild and they feel like in 2 years they're not going to be able to re-sign him because they're going to want a ton of dough, then when you trade a guy, it's the same notion in trading Johnny Gaudreau, is you trade him while he's got 2 years on his contract because his value is much higher in a trade situation with 2 years of control over that player than it is over a guy with just a year left. So to me, Kemper's a guy that could end up in Toronto. Kemper's a guy that could end up in Colorado. Kemper's a guy that could possibly end up in Carolina.
Pittsburgh, maybe?
I don't think Pittsburgh. I think they're going to go with Jari. I think they could bring back Fleury if Vegas buys him out. And they're going to trade Matt Murray. So, and Pittsburgh doesn't have any. It's not picks. And what does Arizona need? They need picks. I mean, Jim Rutherford trades away every pick and prospect to keep the window open, and God bless him. But eventually, the credit card bill is going to come due, and it might be coming due already. Yeah. So, I mean, they're
especially when your captain says your window's closing.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, Sid's not an idiot. It is closed. No. It may already be closed. I mean, they look like total shit in the playoffs. They look like shit last year too. I mean, they've lost. I think 10 of their last 11 playoff games since winning the back-to-back cup. So that's a team that the window probably is, if not closed, but it may be open a crack. And you better hope it's a really cold night to get any cool air in your house with that window open.
And looking in the free agency too, like knowing like some of the top free agents out there, Pietrangelo, Braden Holtby, like for a season that Holtby had this year, just for the way his numbers look, do you still think he gets the money that he wants on the market, or do you think his price drops a lot?
I think flat cap really hurts a goaltender. A
lot of goalies this year too.
Yeah, the goalie market's craziest I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And then you couple it with, guys like Kemper that are trade possibilities, and all the free agent goalies that are out there. And this changing of the guard with so many young goalies. And then you see Hart comes in and now 21 years old, now 22, and playing well in the league. Teams may go to that younger option in a flat cap situation earlier because it's cheaper on entry-level contracts. So Holtby, I don't think will get what he wants. He'll get a decent, ticket, but I don't think he's going to get, even anything close to comparable with Bob got. And there's a cautionary tale in itself, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I just don't see it, for Holtby. I mean, you got Taylor Hall out there. I mean, I feel bad for these guys. It sucks. You want to become a UFA your whole career, and then a freaking pandemic hits, and a flat cap for next year, probably the next 3 years. So the chance to cash in that once in a lifetime opportunity to get that FU money may be kind of screwed for them, Petrangelo's going to get paid. Taylor Hall's going to get paid, but maybe not as much as they were going to get, or term.
Yeah, and just going to the stages of the NHL draft now, where the Flyers stand at pick number 23. And it was talked about during the press conference with Chuck Fletcher that they were talking about like possibly if there was like a chance they trade the pick, if the option's out there, like you can't deny that type of choice if they have to make it. Like they said there was a possibility they can trade down too. Like, do you think the Flyers keep the pick? Do you think they maybe move down in the draft? Like, where do you think their options are there?
I believe he said it was more likely they would move back as opposed to up, but that's general manager speak. Talk to me when there's a player that they have ranked in their top 10, it's available at 16. Then it's a game changer for them. And you go, wow, we're addressing a need with a really good player that could be on a quick path to the NHL and fits in with this young core perfectly from a stylistic and play standpoint. So that can change. We just don't know what those variables are. We don't know what their board looks like. But I will say that, if they have a player that's ranked like in their top 8, and they go, this is a top 8 player on our board. If we were choosing 8, we would choose this player. And he's there at 15, 17, and there's an ability to move up and grab him, they'll do it. So it's an impossible thing to handicap because we just don't know. And the other thing is, this draft is, everybody's under the same constraints. Nobody's been able to see any of these draft eligible players play the playoffs or, Memorial Cup and Major Junior or the collegiate finals or in Europe. It was all paused. So how they view some of these players could be vastly different now. I talked to a lot of the scouts in this past week, and, one of the things is in the scout, I talked to Mark Gregg about this today, who handles the WHL, checking in on guys that he scouted during the season, because when you're draft eligible, so much can change in one summer if you hit the gym and do the right things. And, seeing where a guy's, body has changed from March until now could be vastly different. And that's going to affect a lot of teams' boards. And the ones that do a good job in diligently knowing, which players did the right things or work the right way during this unique situation are going to be the ones that have a little bit of a leg up here.
And just like looking at the draft right now, like it's told to be it's going to be a very deep first round at the fact of that. And like with Chuck Fletcher they were talking about possibility of picking the best player available if they do stay at that number 23 slot. Do you think like with the way just everything's going right now with COVID, it's been just difficult, just like the base of looking at players and scouts and stuff like that? Do you think this is just a point where you take the best player available on the board and not specifically look at what you need?
Well, I mean, it's a puzzle. And this is not, this isn't one of those little kid puzzles we had, with 15 pieces with the big puzzle pieces like this when we were kids. This is a 5,000 piece puzzle with those little ones, and it's a bitch to put it together because you have to put it together in so many layers. Number one, it's okay. Is the guy a player? What can he potentially be at the NHL level? What's the timeline for him to get to the NHL? Where's he going after the draft? Is he going to junior? Is he going to college? Because if he goes to college, there's a chance we could lose him because we've seen players do that recently, and the Flyers just lost a guy that they had the rights to. So there's all those things to figure out, and to figure out what your team's going to be whenever that window of time is when his arc lands him to the NHL. So there's a lot of little pieces to that to figure out for a GM. So just picking, like it's easy for Chuck to say, yeah, we're going to pick the best, or Brent to pick the best available player. But it's the best available player that falls into a timeline and checks certain boxes that they need to check for these puzzle pieces to fit together, which the least of which is just to mention, how they fall into the NHL and contract wise and all those things too. So there's a lot to consider there.
And like just going towards like for next season, looking at the offseason moves, like looking at a guy like Nolan Patrick, because Chuck Fletcher also brought this up too, on how he does see Nolan Patrick possibly playing some games next year. Just like how difficult is this situation just to grasp? Because right now you don't know really much about Patrick at this point and his health.
I think they know more than he's letting on. I think that they have far more information than they've kind of given out to the fan base, because I don't think that they want to put an expectation regarding Nolan Patrick out there because
they really can't, right?
Yeah, I mean there could be a setback that, and they just don't know. You're dealing with the brain.
Yeah, right. It's not like it's a broken arm.
Yeah, you can't just take an X-ray or
and it heals.
Yeah, I mean you just don't. There's so many variables to this, and there's a lot of unknown science to it. So, what I believe is that Nolan's in a much better place dealing with the issue, that they have it under control. What I'll tell you is this about Nolan Patrick. The guy is so insanely skilled. And I know so many people on Twitter, oh, he's a bust and he was a number 2 pick, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Every player's got a different arc into their development. Maybe he shouldn't have played right away. And that wasn't number 2 that year wasn't the same as it was when Jack Eichel was number 2. I get it. But, talking to Angelo Ricci, the Flyers skills coach, who worked a ton with Nolan this year, and Ange knows, he knows talent. I mean, he's worked with Nathan McKinnon.
Crosby, right?
Years, Crosby. He knows what elite talent is. And talking to both on the record and off the record with Angelo, Nolan is an elite talent. I mean, you watch him put him through a workout, and Nolan is so smooth. His skating, his puck handling, his release, every element, transitioning, every part of it's there. You just got to be healthy and realize that he belongs in the NHL and be able to put it together. If that happens, then you're going to have a real, real good player on your hands, because he is a massive talent. And in his draft year, he would have been the number 1 overall pick if he wasn't dealing with the core injury that year.
Yeah, just like going back, everyone likes to go back to that draft. A bunch of Flyers fans love to go back to that draft saying, why did we pick Patrick at that pick? Look at what a guy like Makar, look at what Heiskanen did with Dallas. Look at what it's Patterson. It's just like it's a bunch of hypotheticals that people like to use for that draft, saying just like it's Patrick was the best player available at number 2.
Yeah. Well, why didn't anybody take Tom Brady before 199th pick in his draft year at Michigan? Drive yourself fucking bananas.
yeah, definitely. And to me, I think everybody looks at that and just looks at the 4 players that went around them, and everybody, oh well, they could have got this guy, and Vancouver got Pettersson. It's like, dude, you can't look at it like that because another thing is too is that the Flyers needed a center at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's he filled a need. I mean, they moved up
Right.
from 13 to 2. It was
because everybody was thinking that he was going to go number 1, and last minute they took Heischer,
yeah.
and then he kind of just fell into our hands.
Yeah.
And at that point, it was something they needed.
Yeah, he checked all the boxes, and look, he may end up checking every one of those. He may not too. When you're dealing with a migraine issue, I can imagine what it's like, living with that. I mean, I had a post concussion migraine issue when I was playing way back, and I remember it being so bad. I think I was 13 or 14, and I remember asking my mom to duct tape the sides of the shades because the light coming into the bedroom with the shades down just on the sides was making my head want to split open. It's brutal, and I only had it for maybe a month. I mean, he's dealt with it a long time now, and it's no way to live.
Yeah, just like talking about like missing people in the draft. Like some people bring up Braden Point. Oh, why didn't the Flyers draft Braden Point? Everyone missed Braden Point.
Yeah, and then a couple years ago, Joe Veleno as well. How he dropped real late into the first round.
Yep. Yeah, there's always guys that you don't see it. You don't see high end player. Yeah, it's just part of sports.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just wrapping up this episode right here because we're getting towards the end. Like, Jace, do you have any like last minute thoughts on what you think the Flyers can be for next season? Do you think they're going to improve a lot? Do you think this team's going to be a lot better off for next season?
I think the team will be better. I don't know that we're going to see these splashy additions to the lineup or the roster. I think there could be some little moves. I think the prudent thing to do, and like the Lightning are a good example, to not overreact, to know that your foundation of young players already here and coming are developing. And that's the way you got to build a team in salary cap sports. You can't go out into free agency and trades and be all splashy because you know what? That's silly season. You end up overpaying. You have to supplement. You have to do that a little bit here and there. And they did it with Kevin Hayes. And, teams do it. And they make moves. And like I mentioned that Sergachev for Drouin move. And those are smart moves. That's what you have to do. But, you got guys like Sanheim and Myers. Myers, I'm telling you, he's going to end up being the second best defenseman on this team. Yeah. He is an insane athlete. Sanheim, really good player. Did they look good in that Islander series? No. But they'll learn from it.
Not many guys did.
No. And you learn from it. And it takes time.
Right.
And
talking about Tampa, too. I mean, 15, Cup final, conference finals a couple of years in a row, and then last year's loss, and then they ended up winning it all. And then same with Washington a couple of years ago.
And they never overreacted. They never overreacted and said, we got to do all these crazy moves. They made little moves to supplement that roster with what they needed, not what the fan base thought they needed. And you can't overreact to this situation of, playing in the return to play in the hub cities and no fans and certain players didn't get it going. Konechny didn't score. He's not a big-time player. I got news for you. Konechny had 4 more goals in the regular season than Matt Barzal. He had more points than Matt Barzal and played less games. Barzal was great. He got his game back. Konechny didn't. Is that going to be the way it is for Konechny going forward and the way it is for Barzal? No, maybe. Probably not. So you have it. The talent is here. You need to supplement it properly, and I think they'll do that. I don't think there'll be anything crazy unless a crazy opportunity presents itself in this unique circumstance with maybe a line A or something like that. I don't see that happening, but again, it would be general manager malpractice to not kick the tires if there was a conversation to be had.
Yeah, so one last thing here. Speaking of the RFAs, UFAs that the Flyers have with Brian Elliott, do you think that the Flyers will re-sign Elliott? And if they don't, you think there's any goaltenders they could go for with this big goaltending market?
Look, you're one more year away from paying Carter Hart. So you got to be careful here. I think Elliott would be the prudent move to make to bring back on another one-year deal. The relationship between Brian and Carter is really good.
Yeah, and Hart's hinted at that as well.
Yeah, and I've talked to Carter about it, and he's been a big help to him because Moose has been through a ton. He's played a lot of playoff games, and he works his ass off still. He pushes Carter. He can come in, he'll give you quality starts, and he's a known commodity versus an unknown. In this situation, when they do come back, you're going to see more 3 games in 4 days, more back-to-backs, a more compressed schedule. You're going to need a backup that is going to be able to give you quality starts.
That's really what Elliott did the whole year.
Yep. His numbers weren't great, but his
No.
play was much better than his numbers. And when Carter went out for the 9 games, he went 7-2. So I look at those things and I go, yeah, that's the reason why to bring him back. Plus, Brian knows that he's not going out onto the open market and getting a starting job, or he's not going out on the open market and getting a $4 million contract. He's in a comfortable situation. The organization likes him. He likes the organization. The tandem works well together. The coaches work well. He works well with Kim Dillabaugh. So I think that's the most likely scenario. Going out into the market, again, free agency is silly season. You overpay for guys. And, Brian, I always use this line. I think it's the most brilliant line when talking about hockey from Brian Burke. 80% of hockey in the NHL is goaltending. Unless you don't have it, then it's 100%. So it's something you got to make sure is there. So I don't think the Flyers will recognize that. And I think the Moose will end up coming back.
Yeah, so I think this is going to wrap it up here at the Flyer Up podcast. We'd like to thank Jason Myrtetus once again for joining us. Second time here on the Flyer Up podcast. So, Jason, thank you for joining us once again.
No problem, boys. Anytime.
Yeah, so that's going to do it for this episode of the Flyer Up podcast. Don't forget to follow us on our social media pages at Flyer Up Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and also YouTube. Don't forget to follow Jason Myrtetus as well on his Twitter page at Jason Myrt on Twitter. So thank you for listening to this episode of the Flyer Up Podcast. I'm your host, Amadeo Gracia. He is Chris Mayer, and we will be back next time on the Flyer Up Podcast. So thank you for listening, everyone.